The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as ambassador. Strenike of the Valorian Collective delivered what he believed would be the final message humanity would ever hear. The massive alien stood at the center of the crystalline forum, his forearms spread wide in a gesture that every species present understood as dominance. Around him, representatives from 47 different civilizations watched with a mixture of anticipation and pity. The human delegation has exactly 60 hours to comply with our demands, Strenike announced, his translator rendering his clicking speech into standard galactic common. They will surrender complete control of their military forces, dismantle their weapons platforms, and submit to collective oversight. Failure to do so will result in the complete pacification of their system. Sarah Chen, the human ambassador, sat perfectly still in her delegation's booth. She was a small woman by human standards, barely 5 feet tall, with graying hair pulled back in a simple bun. To the assembled aliens, she looked fragile, almost helpless. Her face showed no emotion as she listened to the ultimatum that would decide the fate of her entire species. The Valorian Collective had been expanding across the galaxy for 3 centuries, absorbing worlds and civilizations into their empire through a combination of military might and economic pressure. They had refined the process to a science. A species would be given an ultimatum, exactly 60 hours to surrender their sovereignty. Most complied immediately. Those who resisted were crushed within days by the Collective's overwhelming fleet. Humanity had been discovered only 5 years ago, a young species barely beginning to explore beyond their own solar system. The Collective had watched, waited, and studied. The humans were technologically primitive by galactic standards, their weapons crude, their ships slow. They posed no threat. They would be easy to absorb. Threnok continued his speech, detailing the terms of surrender. Human ships would be decommissioned. Their colonies would be placed under collective administration. A percentage of their population would be conscripted for labor in the Empire's industrial worlds. Standard procedure, really. Generous, even, compared to what happened to species who refused. Does the human delegation wish to respond? The council arbiter asked, his ancient voice carrying across the chamber. Sarah Chen rose slowly from her seat. She walked to the speaking platform with measured steps, her hands clasped behind her back. When she reached the center, she looked up at Threndok, meeting his multiple eyes with her own steady gaze. "We have heard your ultimatum," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. 60 hours to surrender everything we are, everything we've built. "That is correct," Threndok replied, a hint of satisfaction in his tone. "I anticipate your compliance will be swift. Humans are a practical species, from what we've observed." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, to the surprise of everyone in the chamber, she smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the kind of smile a predator might wear before striking. "I need to tell you a story," she began, "about something that happened on Earth, long before we reached the stars. There was a war, one of many in our history. An empire had conquered most of a continent, and they turned their attention to a small group of islands. These islands were defended by a relatively small force. Outnumbered, outgunned, facing an enemy with superior numbers and resources." The chamber was silent. Other delegates leaned forward, confused by this apparent digression. "The Empire sent an ultimatum to these islands," Sarah continued. "Surrender or be destroyed." The defenders sent back a single word in response. That word was no. The Threndok's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "And what happened to these foolish defenders?" "They fought," Sarah said simply, "for years. They stood alone against an empire. They were bombed, invaded, besieged. They lost cities, ships, thousands of lives. But they never surrendered. And eventually, they won." "A charming anecdote," Threndok said dismissively, "but irrelevant. Your species faces the combined might of 47 civilizations. You have no allies, no advanced technology, no hope of victory. Sentiment and old stories will not save you." Sarah nodded slowly. "You're right about one thing. We have no allies here." She looked around the chamber at the assembled delegations. Every species in this room either joined the collective or stood aside while others were conquered. Not one of you fought back. There were uncomfortable stirrings among the delegates. The truth of her words struck home. But you're wrong about hope, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. You've studied us for 5 years. You've watched our ships, counted our weapons, measured our technology. You think you know us, but you don't. You don't understand what you're threatening. Enlighten me, Threnike said, his tone mocking. Sarah walked closer to the Valorian ambassador, craning her neck to look up at his towering form. When she spoke, her voice was cold and clear. Humanity doesn't surrender. It's not in our nature. We've fought each other for thousands of years over everything from resources to ideas to pride. We've nearly destroyed ourselves dozens of times. We're violent, stubborn, and absolutely terrible at knowing when we're beaten. Every war in our history that should have ended in quick defeat dragged on for years because we refused to quit. She paused, letting her words sink in. You want our weapons? Our ships? Our colonies? You're welcome to try and take them. But understand this. We will fight you for every single meter of space. We will contest every planet, every moon, every asteroid. We will make you pay for every inch in blood and fire. And we will never, ever stop. Threndok's posture shifted slightly. For the first time, there was a hint of uncertainty in his stance. You have 60 hours, Sarah said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Every being in the chamber heard her clearly. Not to surrender. To leave our space. To go back to the collective and tell them that they made a mistake. Because if your fleets enter our system, if you fire a single shot at a human world, you won't just be starting a war. You'll be starting the only war we know how to fight. And what kind of war is that? The Arbiter asked, his curiosity overcoming his neutrality. Sarah Chen turned to face the entire council. Her expression was absolutely serious. Total war, she said. The kind where there are no rules, no mercy, no quarter given or expected. The kind where we throw everything we have and everything we are into, destroying our enemy. The kind where we'd rather burn our own worlds than let you have them. We've done it before to each other. We'll do it to you. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Several delegates stood, voices raised in protest and disbelief. How dare this representative of a primitive species threaten the collective? But Threnike was silent. He was remembering the reports his intelligence officers had compiled. Humans had something like 47 different words for war in their primary language alone. Their entire history was conflict after conflict. They had developed weapons capable of rendering their own planet uninhabitable, and they had come within minutes of using them on themselves multiple times. Sarah returned to her delegation's booth. Before she sat down, she delivered one final statement. The clock is ticking, Ambassador Threndok. 59 hours and 43 minutes until you have to make a choice. We've already made ours? Admiral Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the UNSC Defiance, humanity's largest warship, and watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. 48 hours had passed since Sarah Chen's ultimatum to the Valorian collective. The response had been predictable. The collective had sent their fleet. Status report, Webb ordered. His voice calm despite the hundreds of enemy contacts appearing on the screen. We've got 372 collective warships entering the system, Lieutenant Kowalski reported. They're maintaining standard formation, approaching at 0.4 light speed. Estimated arrival at Mars orbit in 6 hours. Webb nodded. The collective was confident. Why wouldn't they be? Their fleet represented the combined military might of dozens of species. Each ship was larger, faster, and more heavily armed than anything humanity had ever built. On paper, this should be a massacre. All ships report ready, Admiral, Commander Park said from the tactical station. The defense grid is active. Ground installations are at full alert. We're as ready as we're going to be. Webb allowed himself a small smile. They have no idea what they're walking into. Aboard the collective flagship Dominance. Fleet Commander Zephril reviewed the tactical situation with growing satisfaction. The human fleet was exactly where his intelligence had predicted, gathered around their homeworld in a defensive posture. 43 human warships against his 372. The battle would be over before it began, Commander. We're detecting unusual energy readings from the human ships, his sensor officer reported. Specify, Zephyr ordered. Their power cores are running at maximum output, but they're not charging weapons or shields. The energy is being directed to systems we can't identify. Zephyr waved a dismissive appendage. Likely desperation measures. Continue approach. All ships prepare to broadcast surrender terms once we achieve optimal firing position. What Zephyr didn't know, what none of the collective commanders knew, was that humanity had spent the last 5 years doing exactly one thing: preparing for this moment. When Earth had made first contact with the Galactic Council, human leaders had quickly realized the truth of their situation. They were alone in a galaxy where might made right, where the strong preyed on the weak, and where their technological disadvantages made them prime targets for absorption or conquest. So humanity had made a decision. They would not catch up to galactic technology. That would take centuries they didn't have. Instead, they would do what humans had always done best. They would innovate, adapt, and find ways to turn their weaknesses into strengths. Lieutenant Chen, no relation to the ambassador, monitored her station aboard the Defiance with steady hands. She was 23 years old, had graduated top of her class from the Naval Academy, and was about to help unleash something the galaxy had never seen before. Reactor at 110%, she reported. Magnetic containment holding steady. Payload delivery systems armed and ready around Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies. Similar reports echoed across human channels. Every ship, every station, every defensive platform was ready. They had one chance to make this work. The collective fleet crossed the orbit of Jupiter. Their formation perfect, their confidence absolute. They had done this hundreds of times before. The pattern was always the same. 5 hours to engagement range, Kowalski announced. Webb opened a channel to all human forces. This is Admiral Webb to all commands. The enemy believes we will fight a conventional engagement. They believe our ships will meet their ships in open combat where their superior numbers and technology will ensure victory. They are correct about their advantages, but they have made one critical error in their calculations. He paused, looking at the faces of his bridge crew. Young, determined, afraid, but resolute. They assumed we would fight fair. Execute protocols scorched Earth, across the human fleet. Weapon systems that had confused collective sensors suddenly came online. But these weren't traditional energy weapons or missile launchers. These were something else entirely. The first collective ship to realize something was wrong was the cruiser Retribution. Its sensors detected a massive energy spike from one of the smaller human vessels, followed by what appeared to be a projectile launch. But the projectile was moving too slowly to be a missile. It was barely accelerating at all. Evasive action, the ship's captain ordered out of habit, but there was no need. The projectile would miss by kilometers, except it didn't miss. 50 kilometers from the collective ship, the projectile detonated. The explosion was unlike anything in the collective's military database. It wasn't antimatter, wasn't fusion, wasn't any conventional weapon they recognized. The blast created an expanding sphere of superheated plasma that reached temperatures found only in the hearts of stars. The collective cruiser's shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and absorb kinetic impacts, might as well have been paper. The Retribution simply ceased to exist. Across the collective fleet, alarms began screaming. More human ships were firing these impossible weapons. More collective vessels were dying. What are they using? Zephyr demanded, his calm shattered. What kind of weapon is that? His science officer was frantically analyzing the sensor data. Commander, it's a magnetic containment field collapse. They're creating miniature stars and using magnetic fields to direct the plasma. The temperatures are exceeding our defensive capabilities by orders of magnitude. How is that possible? The energy requirements alone should they're using their entire reactor output for single shots, the officer interrupted. Each weapon fires once, then the ship goes dark for several minutes while the reactor recharges. It's insanely inefficient. Zephyr understood immediately. Efficiency didn't matter when you were fighting from a defensive position. The humans weren't planning to pursue or maneuver. They were turning their ships into single-shot cannons, gambling everything on overwhelming firepower. It was brutal. It was primitive. It was working. All ships. Evasive patterns. Return fire. Zephyr ordered. The collective fleet began to respond, their superior sensors and targeting systems locking onto human vessels. Energy beams and plasma. Torpedoes crossed the distance between the fleets, and that's when humanity's second surprise revealed itself. The human ships didn't dodge. They didn't even try to avoid the incoming fire. Instead, their shields flared to life. But these shields were different from standard galactic technology. Rather than creating an energy barrier, they generated massive magnetic fields that deflected the charged particles of energy weapons away from the ships. It wasn't perfect. Several human vessels took hits, their hulls breaching, crew dying, but far fewer than should have been destroyed. Impossible, Zephyr whispered. They've maximized their defenses against energy weapons at the cost of kinetic protection. They studied our tactics and built their entire fleet to counter our specific weapon types. Aboard the Defiance, alarms blared as enemy fire struck the shields. The ship shuddered, but held. Shield generators at 70%, Chen reported. Reactor charged. Ready for second shot. Target the battleship group Delta, Webb ordered. All ships in firing position synchronized strike. 20 human vessels fired simultaneously. 20 miniature suns bloomed in the darkness of space. 18 collective ships disappeared in the inferno. The battle raged for 3 hours. The collective fleet, despite its numerical superiority, found itself in a nightmare scenario. Human weapons were devastatingly effective at close range, and the humans refused to break formation. Every time a collective ship closed to optimal firing distance, it entered the range of those terrible stellar weapons. The collective tried to adapt, tried to use their superior speed to strike from longer ranges, but the humans had prepared for that too. Automated defense platforms hidden throughout the asteroid belt activated, launching waves of kinetic projectiles. Simple rocks accelerated to a fraction of light speed. Primitive, but against shields designed primarily for energy weapons. Horrifyingly effective, Commander. We've lost 147 ships, Zephyr's tactical officer reported, his voice shaking. Human losses are at 19 vessels. At this rate, I can do math, Zephyr snapped. He looked at the tactical display, at the burning wrecks of collective ships. At the humans who refused to retreat, who seemed willing to die to exact a terrible price. For the first time in 3 centuries of conquest, the Valorian collective faced an enemy that scared them. The Galactic Council chambers had become something between a command center and a disaster zone. Representatives from 47 civilizations watched. Live feeds of the battle in the Sol system with expressions ranging from shock to horror. What was supposed to be a simple pacification operation had turned into a bloodbath. Ambassador Threndok stood frozen before the displays, his forearms hanging limply at his sides. In 6 hours of combat, the collective had lost more ships than in the previous 30 years of expansion combined. And the humans showed no signs of stopping. They're savages, Senator Krilth of the Havanites whispered, his tentacles curling in distress. They're willing to die just to hurt their enemy. What kind of species fights like this? Sarah Chen sat in the human delegation booth, her expression unreadable. She had tried to warn them. She had given them a choice. They hadn't listened. The council arbiter rose from his throne, his ancient form trembling slightly. Ambassador Chen, your species is committing an act of unprecedented violence against a lawful collective action. Cease your resistance immediately, or face sanctions from the entire council. Sarah stood slowly. She walked to the speaking platform and looked up at the arbiter with tired eyes. Sanctions? She said softly. You're going to sanction us? For defending our homes? She gestured to the screens showing the battle. The collective invaded our space with the intention of conquering our worlds and enslaving our people. We are defending ourselves. And you want to punish us for it? The collective offered generous surrender terms. Threndok interjected, finding his voice. Your resistance is causing unnecessary casualties. Sarah turned to face him. Unnecessary? You're right. This entire battle is unnecessary. It would never have happened if you had respected our sovereignty. If you had treated us as equals instead of prey. She looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates. Every species in this room has either joined the collective or watched as others were absorbed. You've created a system where might makes right, where the strong can do whatever they want to the weak. And now you're shocked that someone is fighting back? Fighting back. Delegate Morph of the Silicon Alliance spoke up, his crystalline form flickering with agitation. You're slaughtering them. Have you seen the casualty figures? I have, Sarah said coldly. 163 collective ships destroyed. Approximately 40,000 dead. Tragic. Do you know how many humans have died? She pulled up a display. 3,412. Mostly crew from ships that took critical damage. Every single one of them a volunteer who knew exactly what they were fighting for. The number hung in the air. The kill ratio was staggering. But let me give you some other numbers, Sarah continued. In the Valorian Collective's last expansion wave, they absorbed 15 species. The generous surrender terms included conscription of 20% of each species. Population for labor in industrial worlds. That's approximately 200 million beings torn from their homes and families. How many of them do you think survived the first year? How many are still alive? Threndok said nothing. The truth was that survival rates for conscripted labor were not something the collective publicized. So yes, Sarah said, her voice rising. We are killing your people. And we will continue to kill them until they leave our space. Because the alternative is a slow death for our entire species. Given that choice, we choose to fight. In the Sol system, the battle had reached a critical phase. The collective fleet, realizing that their conventional tactics were failing, had regrouped and was attempting a new strategy. They would sacrifice smaller ships to draw human fire. While their battleships advanced under the cover of overwhelming point defense fire, Admiral Ma watched the enemy formation shift and nodded grimly. They're adapting. Smart Kowalski. Update the tactical network. All ships execute pattern Thermopylae. The reference was lost on the younger crew members, but the older officers smiled darkly. Thermopylae, the ancient battle where 300 Spartans had held a mountain pass against an army of thousands. They had died to the last man, but the enemy had paid dearly for their victory. Human ships began to withdraw, but not in retreat. They fell back toward Earth and Mars in a carefully choreographed pattern, drawing the collective fleet deeper into the solar system, into increasingly dense defensive zones. Sir, they're taking the bait, Park reported. Enemy fleet pursuing. They'll reach the Mars defense grid in 40 minutes. Webb opened a channel to all human forces. All commands. This is Defiance Actual. The enemy believes we're retreating. Let them believe it. Hold fire until they cross the red line. Then show them what happens when you bring a war to humanity's doorstep. The collective fleet pressed forward, their commanders sensing victory. The humans were breaking. Finally, Fleet Commander Zephril allowed himself a moment of relief. The battle had been far costlier than anticipated, but the outcome was inevitable. The humans had fought well, had inflicted terrible damage, but they were running out of ships. Once the fleet reached Earth, it would be over. Commander, we're detecting power signatures throughout the asteroid belt, his sensor officer reported. Hundreds of them. No, thousands. Zephril's blood ran cold. What kind of signatures? The same type we detected before the humans fired their stellar weapons. Sir, they've been hiding platforms throughout the belt. It's not a defensive line. It's a minefield. Full stop. All ships. Emergency deceleration. But momentum at point for light speed doesn't stop on command. The collective fleet plowed forward into the asteroid belt, and hell opened up around them. Thousands of automated weapons platforms activated simultaneously. Each one was crude, barely more than a reactor, a magnetic accelerator, and a guidance system. But there were thousands of them, and they had been waiting in silence for exactly this moment. The platforms fired. Miniature suns bloomed throughout the belt like deadly flowers. Collective ships died by the dozen, caught in overlapping fields of plasma that no shield could withstand. Evasive action. All ships scatter, Zephril ordered, but the density of fire made evasion impossible. Everywhere his ships turned, more platforms activated. More weapons fired, and through it all, the human fleet, no longer retreating, turned and charged back into the fray. They planned this, Zephril said, his voice hollow. All of it. The initial engagement, the retreat, everything was designed to draw us into this killing field. His tactical officer was frantically calculating. Sir, at current loss rates, we'll be combat ineffective in less than an hour. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Zephril looked at the displays, at the burning wrecks of his fleet. At the humans who fought with a ferocity that defied understanding, the collective had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that because humanity was technologically primitive, they were also militarily primitive. But humans had been waging war against each other for thousands of years. They understood tactics, strategy, and the psychology of combat in ways the collective had never needed to learn. Because for 3 centuries, the collective had never faced an enemy that fought back. All ships, Zephril said, the words tasting like ash. Withdraw from the system. Maximum speed. Aboard the Defiance, a ragged cheer went up from the bridge crew as enemy ships began to break formation and flee. Shall we pursue, sir? Park asked. Webb shook his head. Negative. Let them go. We've made our point. He looked at the casualty reports scrolling across his screen. 23 human ships destroyed. Over 7,000 dead. The price of freedom. Open a channel to Earth Command, Webb ordered. Tell them the collective is in retreat. Sol system is secure. In the council chambers, the delegates watched in stunned silence as the collective fleet fled the Sol system, leaving behind over 200 destroyed vessels. It was the worst military defeat in collective history. Sarah Chen stood at the speaking platform, her posture straight despite the exhaustion she felt. The battle is over, she announced. The collective fleet has withdrawn. We are willing to accept their surrender and discuss terms for a ceasefire. Threndok's mandibles clicked in outrage. Surrender? You think we will surrender to you? Sarah's expression didn't change. You invaded our space. We defeated your fleet. By your own laws, by the very rules you've used to conquer dozens of species, you have lost. So yes, Ambassador, we expect your surrender. The chamber erupted in chaos. This was unprecedented. The collective did not surrender. They did not lose. But Sarah Chen simply returned to her seat and waited. The message was clear. Humanity had changed the rules of the game. 3 weeks after the Battle of Sol, the Galactic Council convened for what many believed would be the most important session in its 1,000-year history. The chamber was packed with delegates, observers, and media representatives from across known space. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. The Valorian Collective had sent a new delegation. Threndok was gone, recalled to the homeworld in disgrace. In his place sat Matriarch Valshara, one of the oldest and most respected leaders of the collective. Her presence signaled that the collective was taking humanity seriously. Sarah Chen sat in the human delegation booth, flanked by Admiral Webb and General Rodriguez, commander of Earth's ground forces. They had been recalled from Sol to participate in the negotiations, and their presence sent its own message. Humanity's military leaders were here, ready to continue the fight if necessary. The council arbiter opened the session with traditional formalities, but everyone could sense the tension in the air. The old order had been shattered, and no one knew what would replace it. The council recognizes Matriarch Valshara of the Valorian Collective, the arbiter announced. Val single quotes Shara rose with the dignity of her years. Unlike Threndok, she showed no arrogance, no presumption of superiority. She had studied the battle reports extensively and understood exactly what the collective faced. Honored delegates, she began, her voice carrying the weight of authority. The collective acknowledges that our military operation in the Sol system has concluded with significant losses. We are prepared to discuss terms for a formal cessation of hostilities with the human species. The careful wording did not escape notice. She hadn't said surrender. She hadn't admitted defeat. But she also wasn't threatening further action. Sarah Chen stood. The human delegation appreciates the matriarch's willingness to talk. However, we need clarity. Is the collective offering a ceasefire, or are you ending your attempt to conquer humanity? Valshera's mandibles clicked slowly, a sign of consideration. The collective recognizes that humanity has demonstrated significant defensive capabilities. We no longer consider your species a viable target for integration. That's not good enough, Admiral Webb interjected, his voice hard. We need guarantees, treaties, recognition of our sovereignty and territorial rights. You ask for much, Valshara replied. The collective has never signed such treaties with species outside our empire. Then perhaps it's time to start, Sarah said. Because let me be very clear about our position. We are not interested in conquest. We don't want your worlds or your resources. We simply want to be left alone. But if you or any other power attempts to threaten humanity again, what happened in Seoul will seem like a minor skirmish. The threat hung in the air. Senator Krilth of the Havanites rose, his tentacles waving in agitation. This is unacceptable, he declared. The human delegation threatens the collective openly in this very chamber. They must be sanctioned, punished for their aggression. Sarah turned to face Krilth H. Aggression. Senator, the collective invaded our space with a fleet of warships and demanded our surrender. We defended ourselves. How is that aggression? You killed 43,000 beings, Krilth shot back. You destroyed hundreds of ships. You showed a level of violence that civilized species do not employ. Civilized, Sarah repeated softly. She looked around the chamber. Let me tell you about civilization. On Earth, we have a saying, civilization is just a thin veneer over chaos. For thousands of years, humans have built societies, cultures, laws. We've created art and music and literature. We've developed philosophies about justice and peace and the sanctity of life. She paused, letting her words sink in. But underneath all of that, we remember what we are. We are survivors. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day. We fought predators, diseases, each other, natural disasters. We survived ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly destroyed us. And we learned one fundamental truth. When someone threatens your existence, you fight back with everything you have. She walked to the center of the chamber, addressing not just Krilth, but all the assembled delegates. You call us uncivilized because we're willing to fight for our survival? But I ask you, what is civilized about a system where the strong prey on the weak without consequences? What is civilized about absorbing species against their will? What is civilized about 3 centuries of unopposed conquest? Delegate Moore for the Silicon Alliance spoke up, his crystalline form pulsing thoughtfully. The human makes a valid point. The collective's expansion has been viewed as inevitable, unstoppable. No species has successfully resisted. Perhaps that inevitability bred arrogance. Valshera's posture stiffened slightly, but she didn't disagree. The question before this council, the arbiter said, is what happens now. Humanity has demonstrated that they cannot be easily conquered. The collective has learned a painful lesson about underestimating opponents. How do we move forward? General Rodriguez stood for the first time. He was a large man, scarred from decades of service, with eyes that had seen too much combat. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried authority. I've fought in 17 major conflicts, he said. I've seen what war does to people. 2 worlds. The battle in Seoul was necessary, but it was also a tragedy. Those 43,000 beings who died didn't choose to invade us. They were following orders, serving their government. Many of them probably had families, loved ones. Their deaths weigh on me. He looked directly at Valshera. But I would do it again in a heartbeat to protect my people. And we will do it again if we must. However, I don't want to. War should always be the last resort, not the first option. If the collective is willing to recognize our right to exist as a free species, we are willing to coexist peacefully. Valshara considered his words carefully. The collective appreciates the general's candor. You understand the cost of conflict. So do we now. The collective is prepared to offer formal recognition of human sovereignty over the Sol system and your established colonies. And in exchange? Sarah asked. Nothing, Valshara said, surprising everyone. We ask for nothing except the understanding that this matter is closed. No retribution, no expansion of hostilities. Both sides withdraw and maintain peace. Sarah exchanged glances with Webb and Rodriguez. It was a better offer than they had expected. The collective was genuinely rattled, genuinely willing to concede. We can accept those terms, Sarah said. With one addition, humanity requests observer status on the Galactic Council. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs. The council was an exclusive body, membership limited to species that had proven themselves worthy through either technological achievement or cultural contribution. On what basis do you claim such status? The Arbiter asked. On the basis that we have demonstrated we are not prey, Admiral Webb said flatly. We've shown that we can defend ourselves, that we're willing to fight for our principles. If this council is to have any credibility, it cannot ignore species simply because they don't fit existing power structures. Delegate Morph's form pulsed brightly. I support the human request. They have earned the right to be heard. Other delegates began to speak up, some in support, others in opposition. The debate raged for hours, but gradually a consensus emerged. Humanity had changed the status quo. They couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Finally, the Arbiter called for a vote. When the results were tallied, humanity had been granted observer status by a narrow margin. It wasn't full membership, but it was recognition that they existed, that they mattered. Sarah Chen stood before the council one last time. Humanity thanks the council for this recognition, she said. We come to the galactic community not as conquerors or as victims, but as equals. We offer friendship to those who want it, trade to those who need it, and a stern warning to anyone who threatens us. She looked directly at Valshara. The collective gave us 60 hours to surrender. We gave them 60 hours to leave. Both sides chose their paths. Both sides paid the price. Let that be the end of it. Valshara inclined her head in acknowledgement. Agreed. The matter is closed. 6 months later, the first human trade ship arrived at a neutral station on the edge of collective space. The captain was nervous, unsure how they would be received after the battle. But when they docked, they were greeted with professional courtesy. The war was over. A new era had begun. On Earth, Sarah Chen retired from diplomatic service and returned to her home in Seattle. She had served her species well, had helped navigate the most dangerous period in human history. Now she could rest. Admiral Webb remained in command of the fleet. Overseeing the construction of new ships and the training of new crews, humanity had won one battle, but they understood that the galaxy was a dangerous place. They would maintain their defenses, continue to innovate, always prepared for the next threat. In the council chambers, a new booth had been added for the human observer delegation. It was smaller than those of full members, but it was there. A permanent reminder that humanity existed. That they had fought for their place in the galaxy and won. The Valorian Collective. For their part, began a period of internal reflection. The defeated Sol had shaken their confidence, forced them to reconsider their approach to expansion. Some leaders called for revenge for a second invasion with even more ships, but wiser voices prevailed. Matriarch Valsh,